literature of prosperity. And it culminated in the period of Shah Jahan, who created the Taj Mahal, one of the most beautiful buildings in the world.
But it was the rise of another Islamic sultanate that would prove a direct threat to the West. In 1453, Constantinople, the capital of the Christian Byzantine Empire, fell to Muslim troops. After more than 1,000 years of Christian rule, the Turkish Ottomans transformed the ancient Greek city into the capital of their ever-expanding Islamic empire. They renamed it Istanbul, meaning Islam in abundance. At the top of the Ottoman bureaucratic pyramid was the Sultan, an Arabic title meaning ruler.
Sultans were military commanders whose mission was to protect Islamic society.
The sultans lived in the opulent palace of Topkapi, designed to reflect the grandeur of the Ottoman court. Also housed here, in luxurious quarters of carved wood and glazed tile, were the women of the sultan's extended family, the harem. The term comes from the Arabic word haram, meaning forbidden. The Orientalist school of European artists depicted them as dens of sin and opium, even though most of these writers and painters had never even been to the Middle East, let alone seen an Ottoman harem.
The image usually coming out of these accounts is that the harem in general is a secluded place, is a dangerous place to enter. It would seem that these accounts reflect more the fantasies of the people who wrote them.
In fact, the harem was the nerve center of the royal household. Among the wives and concubines housed within were the mothers of future sultans. Thus, the harem commanded significant political power.
These were not isolated people. They were not lazy. They were not invisible. They were engaged in the economic life, invested in long-term trade as well as internal trade. They built endowments, charitable endowments, soup kitchens, mosques, schools, and the like.
But the harem also underscores a significant difference between Islam and the Judeo-Christian tradition. According to the Holy Quran, Muslim men are permitted to marry more than one wife.
Marry women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4.
Even so, permission is only granted on the condition that all wives are treated fairly and equally, so that there is no favoritism.
But if ye fear that ye shall not be able to deal justly with them, then only one. That will be more suitable to prevent you from doing injustice.
And yet, many Muslim men historically have interpreted it almost as an injunction to go out and marry more than one.
The West has long found much to criticize about the status of women in Islamic societies. Although laws vary from country to country, within the pages of the Quran at least, a woman's rights are clearly defined.
The Quran intended to eradicate many negative practices and attitudes towards women, and did so in explicit terms.
The Quran actually granted women the right to own property, to receive an inheritance, and to have a choice in their own marriage and divorce. The Quran also granted women the right to vote, 1,300 years before Western societies even considered it.
I think it's very interesting that a lot of feminists overlook the fact that, in this country in particular, women only got the right to vote in the last 100 years.
Still, in some areas of the Islamic world, many women live harshly restricted lives. To the average Westerner, the traditional head covering worn by Muslim women, the hijab, has become a symbol of oppression.
I remember particularly walking down the street, and a woman was looking very intently at me, staring very intently, And she came up and she walked directly up to me and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Honey, you're in America now. You don't have to wear that here."
To me, the hijab is just 45 inches of material. It's ironic that it has become such a pivotal issue of concern, both within the Muslim community and for non-Muslims.
The covering of one's head is an aspect of several major religions. Today, many Christians and Jews continue to honor this ancient symbol of humility before God. Likewise, some Muslim women choose to wear the hijab only during prayer and other religious occasions.
I don't wear the hijab. I decided not to wear it. I think modesty is something that comes from the inside out. It's not just about one scarf, one piece of cloth. That doesn't make you a good Muslim.
To read it literally, the Quran requires modesty of both women and men. But the specific choice of covering, from the total concealment of the Afghan burqa to the slightly more revealing chador of Iran, reflect cultural preferences, not the edicts of Allah.
Islam was never meant to be a religion that oppresses women. It's just turned out that way because of the way it's manipulated by people who are really expressing their own culture that's patriarchal and tribal and is a reflection of what the society was like before Islam came to the world.
Yet, by the end of the 18th century, no veil could protect Islam from the intrusion of the West. In the 16th century, under Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman armies became a threat to Western Europe when they conquered the Balkans and much of the Crimea. The Ottomans laid siege to Vienna, capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in 1529, and again in 1683. But this was the farthest into Europe that the Islamic Empire would ever reach. By the 18th century, the Ottomans could no longer keep pace with the emerging Western European powers.
The question of why that change took place is one that is embedded, I think, in the broader developments of world history. That the real difference in the 18th century is the coming of the Industrial Revolution.
The Ottomans' once brilliant bureaucracy became bloated and corrupt. Their powerful sultans reduced to political weaklings. The great Ottoman Empire was beginning to crumble. In the early summer of 1798, a fearless young French general named Napoleon Bonaparte and his invasion force stepped ashore at Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast of Egypt. A few weeks later, in the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon easily defeated a larger Egyptian army and captured the city of Cairo. Over the next century, France and England took advantage of weakening governments throughout the Middle East.
Various areas were taken at different times, but on the whole, each conquest shared some characteristics with all the other ones, and that was that the Europeans had a definite idea of ethnic superiority, which made an absolute line between them and the conquered people. And that line was all the more clear with the Muslims because the Muslims were different in religion as well.
European pathways to power followed different routes. European financiers provided funds to Egypt for the construction of the Suez Canal, which began in 1859. However, the massive debts incurred by Egypt in its struggle for modernization ultimately led to Britain taking over the canal and the country.
By 1882, the British simply occupied Egypt and made sure that nothing that would undermine British security or British access through the Suez Canal.
Meanwhile, France concentrated on Algeria, intent on making it the breadbasket of Europe.
The lands of the people were all confiscated. The Arabic language and the religion of Islam were discouraged by the